The Navy's most advanced warship went silent, its billion-dollar brain crippled without warning. No one could fix it until a retired mechanic showed up with nothing but a wrench, a notebook, and 30 years of instinct. They threw everything at it, every top-tier engineer, every AI expert money and clearance could find. But the USS Halcyon, the Navy's crown jeweler, $4.3 billion beast of steel and secrets, just floated there, dead in the water. Then, from the edge of memory and the ashes of retirement, came a man with no clearance, no computer, and no time for bureaucracy. Just a wrench, an old notebook, and 30 years of hard-earned gut instinct. Premier sighed. "Sir, we've lost propulsion again." Lieutenant Neil Darby stood frozen in the control room, his face the color of chalk. His words dropped like anchors into a sea of tension. No one dared move. No one dared breathe. Captain Elise Brannan stepped forward, her boots ringing out against the steel floor. "Define again, Lieutenant." Darby's voice tightened. "Main hybrid units shut down. Manual restart failed. She's not responding to backup protocols." A beat of silence. Then a low, frustrated curse from Chief Engineer Bradley Tennyson, who hadn't looked up from the diagnostic panel in 4 hours. Day 2 of what was meant to be a routine 5-day classified exercise 120 miles off the coast of San Diego had become anything but routine. The Halcyon, the Navy's most advanced destroyer, a titan of technology, had transformed into a lifeless metal ghost. No propulsion, no weapons, limited communications. The hybrid propulsion system, once hailed as the future of naval warfare, was a marvel of electric turbines, gas engines, and real-time AI diagnostics. It was top secret, cutting-edge, and utterly inoperative. Inside the engine room, pressure climbed higher than the reinforced steel walls. 10 engineers, Navy and civilian alike, sweated through their uniforms. Software updates? Pushed. Circuit boards? Replaced. AI systems? Reinitialized twice. Nothing worked. By 400 hours, Brannan had had enough. "No more guesses," she ordered, pacing the briefing room. "We need someone outside the circle." Commander Raj Patel, head of engineering, frowned. "Command won't like that. They hand-picked this team." "And this team," she fired back, "hasn't fixed it." The truth was brutal. If news got out that the Navy's flagship was broken just weeks after launch, heads would roll. Hers would be first. Reluctantly, Brass gave the green light. Calls were made, emails sent. The Navy's best consultants were tapped. All declined. Too little data, too many unknowns. None wanted to risk their reputations on a mystery. By dawn of Day 3, the Halcyon wasn't just malfunctioning, it was defeated. Morale dipped to dangerous lows. Petty Officer Lindsay Roy, usually the ship's unofficial comedian, barely spoke during her shift. An air of quiet failure settled over the decks like fog. At Naval Base Point Loma, Admiral Clarence Pike read the field reports in silence. A hard-nosed commander of 37 years, he rarely questioned data. But something about this didn't sit right. "Get me Raymond Ellis," he said, eyes still on the tablet. "Sir?" His assistant blinked. "You heard me. I don't care where he is, find him." Ellis wasn't supposed to be part of this story. He'd left the Navy 8 years ago. No farewell, no fanfare, just gone. But Pike remembered Bahrain. A blackout, a crisis, and Ellis, then just a senior enlisted man, rerouting an entire system with a wrench, a pencil, and a prayer. The man didn't use AI. He didn't trust it. He listened to machines the way poets listen to silence. Back on the Halcyon, Brannan stood on deck, the sea now feeling ominous. Her radio crackled. "Captain, civilian consultant approved, ETA 5 hours. Name? Raymond Ellis." She turned and walked inside without a word. But 5 hours on a ghost ship feels like a lifetime. With the engines silent and hope slipping, the warship felt more like a floating relic than a weapon of war. Even in the mess hall, voices had vanished. Sailors moved like shadows. Some avoided eye contact. Others didn't bother pretending anymore. Down below, the air reeked of burned rubber from a failed overnight reset. Another fuse gone, another system dark. The AI diagnostics looped in silence. No answers, just code and confusion. "We're missing something fundamental," Tattle muttered, crouched by the power grid. "We designed this system in a lab," civilian engineer Hannah Yuan added. "But ships don't live in labs." Patel sighed. "We need someone who understands chaos." The intercom buzzed to life. "Attention all engine personnel, civilian consultant inbound, ETA 1 hour. Theories flow another Mene, my prodigy? Elon Musk in navy blues?" But only a few knew the truth. When the Black Hawk landed on the Halcyon's deck, silence fell. The man who stepped off didn't look like a savior. Worn boots, a windbreaker faded by salt and time, a face carved by decades of storms and sun. In one hand, a battered notebook. Around his neck, an ancient stethoscope dulled to a weary gray. Chief Tennyson squinted. "This the guy?" Ellis said nothing. He didn't need to. His eyes were already listening. He didn't wait for ceremony. "Where's the engine room?" Alex asked plainly. No one answered, but they led him. The only sound as they descended through the ship's steel belly was the echo of boots against bulkheads. Ellis, walking with the quiet surety of someone who didn't need explanations, asked just 3 questions. "What's she running?" "GE Hydrocore hybrid system," Hannah Yuan replied. "Last-gen code with a semi-autonomous diagnostic shell." "What's she not doing?" "Everything," Patel muttered bitterly. Just outside the engine room, Ellis paused. The hallway here felt colder, like the steel itself had lost its pulse. He tapped the wall with 2 fingers and listened to the faint, uneven echo. Vinnie nodded once. "Don't touch anything. Not until I've heard her." Inside, engineers stood frozen. Skepticism and exhaustion lined their faces. Some exchanged hushed words, unable to believe that the Navy had summoned a man without a tablet, without a badge, without a plan. He didn't ask for a console. He didn't glance at a single diagnostic. He just listened. Bending slightly, he placed the old stethoscope against a junction pipe like a doctor with a patient and went still, so still it made others shift in discomfort. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute passed. Then Ellis straightened up. "Who adjusted the heatsink capacitors after the shutdown?" A young Navy mechanic raised her hand hesitantly. "Me, sir, I followed the default sequence." "You followed it wrong," Ellis said, not unkindly. "Not your fault. That sequence is for clean installs. This was a mid-secle core failure." He turned to Patel. "You ever try restarting a circuit while someone's welding the power line?" "You're not dealing with a dead system," Ellis explained. "You're dealing with a locked one. It's not broken. It's defending itself." Silence. Until Yuan whispered, "That's even possible?" "It is," Ellis said, scribbling into his weathered notebook. "But only if you knew the original build before they buried it under AI." He looked around the room, eyes tired but kind. "This machine isn't complex. She's scared. You've been yelling at her." He smiled, just a little. "I'm here to speak her language." Captain Brannan entered quietly as Ellis directed rewiring efforts. She said nothing, just observed, watching a man with no badge, no degrees, and no time for pretense take command of the ship's wounded heart. What happened next was something no one could have predicted. 7 years ago, Raymond Ellis walked off the USS Grafton. No retirement speech, no send-off, just gone. He didn't attend Navy reunions, didn't respond to emails. He spent his days in a rusted garage near the Norfolk shipyards where the scent of salt and burnt coffee never faded. People brought him broken things, outboard motors, busted pumps, hopeless machines. Somehow he always brought them back to life. That morning, Ellis was elbow-deep in a 1968 Johnson V4 outboard when his landline rang a phone that barely worked and never rang. "This is Raymond." A pause. Then, "Chief Ellis, this is Admiral Clarence Pike." Raymond froze, not from fear but memory. "Pike. Bazrain. The blackout, right?" "Exactly." "I remember," Ellis said, his voice gravel rough. 2 hours before grid failure. We rerouted everything with nothing but a wrench and luck. I need you, Pike said. The Halcyon is down. She's not talking to anyone. Ellis wiped his hands with a rag, staring at the engine he'd been repairing. You've got 200 engineers. What do you need me for? Because they're all trying to outthink the system, Pike said. I need someone who can feel it. Ellis let out a dry chuckle. That sounds like a motivational poster. I'm a mechanic, not a miracle worker. You're the only one who's seen this system before the Navy dressed it in AI and protocols, Pike said quietly, before we made it too smart for its own good. Ellis looked at the old notebook on his bench pages, filled with handwritten diagrams and problem cycles, each one born in the dark belly of a ship. I don't wear the uniform anymore, Clarence? I'm not asking you to, Pike replied. I'm asking you to help us fix a mistake we're too proud to admit we made. Ellis didn't answer. He just hung up. 10 minutes later he called back. You got a bird ready? It's already warming up, Pike said. By the time Ellis stepped onto the Halcyon, word had already ricocheted through Naval Command. Some questioned Pike's judgment. Others scoffed. An uncredentialed old man with no clearance was being flown to fix what the most advanced minds couldn't. Pike didn't care. He remembered the man who once patched an engine blindfolded, who diagnosed failures by feel, by rhythm, by sound. Because Ellis didn't just fix machines, she understood them. On board, doubt was thick in the air. Lieutenant Darby was first to speak when the chopper was heard overhead. You think this guy is our answer? Patel shrugged. At this point, I'd take a janitor with a flashlight. It wasn't sarcasm, it was surrender. Every failed reset had chipped away at their confidence. The ship was no longer theirs. When Ellis stepped onto the deck, he didn't look heroic. Just a man who belonged more in a tool shed than on the Navy's most advanced destroyer. But his presence was magnetic, quiet, unbending, real. Captain Brannan met him at the hatch. I've read your file, Chief Ellis. We appreciate you coming. He met her gaze, calm and unwavering. I didn't come for the Navy, Ellis said quietly. I came for the ship. Captain Brannan blinked, caught off guard by the weight in his voice. Fair enough, she replied, but no one on that deck understood just how personal those words were. Back in Norfolk, Raymond Ellis's world had been small by choice. A tin-roofed garage squeezed between a crabbing supply shack and a sketchy salvage yard off Granby Street. No AC. Just an old desk fan that rattled more than it cooled, but to Raymond it was a sanctuary built on oil, salt, and the slow heartbeat of machines. Engines lined the space like relics of forgotten wars. An '85 Yamaha 150 in mid-resurrection sat across from a diesel generator he picked up at auction for $20. One wall held tools arranged like sacred instruments. Another bore stacks of yellowing Navy manuals dating back to the '70s, and above his workbench a black-and-white photo of him and Jeanette, his late wife, on a pier in San Diego the day he came home from his last overseas deployment. He hadn't stepped aboard a Navy vessel since she passed. That had been the deal. No more engines he couldn't carry, no more systems with acronyms longer than the boats they powered. But when Pike called, something inside cracked. Not from pride, not nostalgia. Something deeper. Something buried under years of grief, diesel smoke and silence. The night before deployment, Raymond sat alone on the back steps of his garage, a cup of cold black coffee in hand. The streets were still, like they knew not to intrude. He opened his notebook. The first page, dated September 14th, 1989, scribbled diagrams, power curves, notes about turbine flow and failures, written in a language only men like him could read. To Ellis, it wasn't just engineering. It was memory. It was music. At 2 a.m, a black SUV rolled up. The driver, barely old enough to shave, stepped out, offered a crisp salute. Chief Ellis, sir, I'm your transport to Oceana Air Base. Raymond nodded. No salute, just a firm handshake. Give me a minute. Inside, he grabbed 3 things: the notebook, the stethoscope, and a cloth-wrapped wrench his father's from the old Newport News shipyard. He hadn't used it in years, but tonight, it was a soldier's sword. On the drive, the young sailor asked, "If you don't mind me asking, Chief, why you?" Raymond looked out the window. "Because I used to talk to machines before they learned how to talk back." The kid didn't get it. That was fine. He didn't need to. By sunrise, Raymond was airborne, westbound at 500 knots in a jump seat made of metal and memory. Below, the coast slid by, Carolina, Georgia, the long breadth of the Gulf. He closed his eyes and was back. USS Tremont 2002, electrical fire, power hemorrhaging. He crawled into a crawl space so tight it dislocated his shoulder just to reach the junction. Fixed it blind, took burns no one ever saw, because when you're the last line between your crew and the dark, you don't hesitate. Now, decades later, the mission was different, but the stakes? Just as high. At Point Loma, no one questioned his presence. Not when Pike's name backed it. At the edge of the helipad, someone tried to hand him a file. System blueprint. Raymond didn't take it. "I'll meet her myself." He boarded the chopper like a man boarding a bus, not casual, not afraid, just focused. As the rotors kicked to life, salt wind whipped the deck, and Ellis leaned back, whispering to himself. "I'm not here to prove anything, I'm here to listen." But Halcyon wasn't just broken. She was hiding something. The chopper landed hard, kicking up mist like shattered glass. The crew stood watching, not with hope, but fatigue. Ellis stepped off in dark denim, steel-toed boots, that worn Navy windbreaker flapping like a flag in the ocean wind. Around his neck, the stethoscope. In one hand, his notebook. In the other, the wrench wrapped like a relic. No one saluted. They weren't sure if they should. Lieutenant Neil Darby stepped forward, doubt etched in his features. "Sir, we've been expecting—" "Don't sir me," Ellis cut in, calm but pointed. "I'm not in uniform, and I'm not here to impress anyone." Darby nodded, a little humbled. Captain Brannan was next. Efficient, direct, respected. She extended a hand. "Chief Ellis, welcome aboard." He shook it firm, grounded. "Not here to give speeches," he said. "Just show me where the girl's sleeping." Brannan raised an eyebrow at the phrasing, but said nothing, just led the way. The Halcyon's corridors were gleaming. State-of-the-art wiring, polished steel, lighting that looked more at home in a space lab than on a destroyer. But Raymond didn't admire any of it. His eyes stayed distant, ears tuned listening for something others couldn't hear. "Feels too quiet," he muttered. "We shut most systems to preserve power," Brannan explained. "No. Not that kind of quiet," he said. "The kind when something's wrong and doesn't want to admit it." She said nothing, just walked faster. When they reached the engine room, Ellis stopped cold. 10 engineers, half in navy blue, half in clean civilian tech vests, stood around the dormant hybrid core, eyes skeptical, tension heavy. One tech whispered, "They sent us the janitor." Raymond heard. Didn't react. He just set his notebook down and approached the machine. It loomed 20 feet tall, turbines sealed, dual generators dead, diagnostics blank. A beast that had forgotten how to breathe. "Where was the last pulse?" he asked Patel. His tongue pause. The last time she tried to wake, where'd she fail? Patel checked his tablet. "Sector B7, voltage collapse during rainid." Ellis moved, slowly, deliberately. He tapped the casing with his father's wrenchless and moved. Moved 5 steps left. Bent down. Placed the stethoscope to a junction node. Closed his eyes. 30 seconds passed. Then he stood. "That's the wrong capacitor type," he said, pointing. Silence. All eyes turned to Hannah Ewan, civilian systems tech. "That's impossible," Hannah Ewan said, stepping forward. "We double-checked everything against the design specs." Raymond didn't flinch. "You checked what the computer told you to check out, what the ship was built with." He pulled open a side panel, revealing a scorched component buried deep within the system's nerve center. That relay was swapped out during prototype testing. Creates a voltage echo when paired with the current interface. AI can't read it because it doesn't know what it's seeing. Commander Patel frowned. That wasn't in the manual. Raymond gave a dry chuckle. Because the manual came after production sanitized the truth. I saw this same failure on a test platform back in '08. They buried it. The smirks vanished. Captain Brannan crossed her arms. Can it be fixed? Raymond nodded slowly. You got solder and a part we can cannibalize from the comm relay housing. That's not regulation, she said. Neither is floating dead in the Pacific for 4 days, he replied. Brannan held his gaze, then gave a single nod. Do it. The room sprang into motion. Engineers scrambled, hands moved fast, but Raymond? He moved right, while the others hovered with tension and urgency. Ellis sat cross-legged on the floor, calm as ever, unfolding a canvas roll of tools with the care of a surgeon. His movements were slow, practiced, sacred. Pull the relay from comms, he told a young tech. But don't touch the shielding. It's brittle. You break it, it's done. Yes, sir, said the tech petty officer D'Angelo Morris before catching himself. Sorry, Raymond. Raymond smiled faintly, already focused again. Patel watched from nearby. So you really think this all comes down to one outdated capacitor? Raymond didn't look up. No. I think that's where it started. The rest is just the system reacting to bad data, fighting phantoms. He lined up the old capacitor next to the new one. Nearly identical on the outside, but inside, a chasm of difference. A tributary tremote. This is what I've been saying for 2 days, Yuan muttered. The system isn't failing, it's resisting. Exactly, Raymond nodded. She's protecting herself. You kept forcing reboots and she thought she was under attack. Brannan was back beside them, arms behind her, listening intently. The AI in these newer systems doesn't just obey, Ellis explained. It evaluates, and when things don't add up, it shuts down not to fail, but to survive. You can't fix that with code. You have to reset its truth. Morris returned with the salvaged relay, handling it like an artifact. Raymond took it, rolled up his sleeves, and got to work. No gloves, no schematics, just instinct and understanding. The soldering iron hissed as molten metal sealed the connection. The scent of burning alloy filled the air, a sharp tang of risk and maybe redemption. When he finished, Raymond sat back, wiped his hands, and said quietly, Cycle the primary, don't force it. Let her wake on her terms. Patel nodded and keyed in the command. The lights flickered, a low vibration rolled through the deck like distant thunder. Then, nothing. Silence. Raymond didn't panic. He stepped forward, pressed the stethoscope against the coil casing and listened. 5 seconds. 10. A single click echoed. Then the diagnostic screen glowed dim, then brighter. After a few seconds, whiter. And core temperature stabilizing, Yuan said, eyes wide. Oh, relay's responding, Patel added. Propulsion interface is back, Morris nearly shouted. No one dared breathe. They were afraid even the sound of hope might scare it all away. Captain Brannan finally broke the spell. Mr. Ellis, what did you do? Raymond shrugged. Gave her something she could trust. She was trying to run on a frequency that didn't match her memory. I just helped her remember who she is. System after system lit green on the panel like stars blinking into a night sky. Even Brannan looked stunned. Unbelievable, she whispered. One of the younger engineers, Riley Brent, always too confident, folded his arms. This doesn't make sense. There's no way you just guessed that. Raymond turned, steady and calm. I didn't guess. I listened. Brent scoffed. It's a machine. You can't listen to metal and wires. Raymond stepped closer, not confrontational, just there. His voice dropped. You ever watch someone bleed out from a pressure burst because the cooling system failed at the wrong second? You ever crawl into a pipe chase with 40 seconds of oxygen left because a valve you warned them about finally blew? Brent didn't answer. Then don't tell me what I can't listen to. No one spoke. Raymond turned back to the engine and tapped it lightly. She's alive. Let her breathe. And for the first time in nearly 4 days, the Halcyon hummed. Not choked, not glitching, but alive, honest, steady, real. Outside, the ship began to move. Inside the control room, Lieutenant Darby leaned toward his console, disbelief written across his face. "Sir, we're moving," he said softly. Captain Brannan stood behind him, arms folded tight. "How fast?" "0.8 knots, he replied. "No drag, power curves returning to normal. She's stabilizing." Commander Patel exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a week. "She's back." Below, in the engine room, disbelief still hung in the air, but one by one the monitors chimed green. Morris clapped, then UN, then Patel. Raymond Ellis didn't clap. He just nodded, eyes on the machine he'd brought back to life, not with data, but with understanding. Raymond didn't flinch. He just kept watching the diagnostic panel, waiting for the last warning light to fade. When it finally blinked out, he closed his notebook with the calm of someone who had done this before. "I've seen worse," he muttered. Captain Brannan came down the ladder into the engine room. Her gaze scanned every face before landing on Raymond. "You did something no one else could. We were 1 hour from towing her back to shore." Raymond shook his head. "You'd have dragged back a corpse. Might have looked fine from the outside, but she'd never sail right again." Brannan looked around at the stunned crew, still piecing together what had just happened. "How'd we miss it? Every expert, every protocol." Ellis leaned against the wall, wiping his hands on an old rag. "Because you stopped listening. Ships like this, they aren't just metal and math. They've got rhythm, memory. Once they fall out of tune, no amount of code can fix that." Brannan nodded slowly. "That relay failure, you really saw it before. USS Mathis, 2008. Prototype install. Same component, same echo loop. But the system specs changed," Yuan said. "Specs change," Raymond replied. "Physics don't." Patel leaned in. "Earlier you said the system was scared, defending itself. You meant that literally?" Raymond shrugged. "As literal as machines get. You give something enough data, it starts making decisions. Your AI thought it was under attack, so it shut the door and threw away the key." He tapped the notebook in his hand. "Keep building smarter systems, but never forget what they're built on. The bones matter." The room went quiet, not in fear, but reflection. The kind of silence that comes when everyone realizes they've been doing things wrong for longer than they want to admit. Brannan finally spoke. "You saved this ship. You saved us." Raymond shook his head. "I didn't save anyone, I just gave her a second chance." Patel asked. "What now? Rewrite every diagnostic protocol?" Raymond almost smiled. "Or teach the next guy to use a stethoscope once in a while?" Laughter rippled through the room, real, unguarded, almost therapeutic. Raymond quietly picked up the cloth bundle with his father's wrench, sliding it into his jacket pocket. He knew what came next. He wasn't meant to stay. He never was. Captain Brannan walked with him toward the deck. "You didn't have to come," she said. "You could have said no." "I almost did." "So why didn't you?" He stopped at the door, glanced back toward the engine room. "Because when a ship calls for help, someone should answer." But not everyone saw this as victory. At Naval Base Point Loma, reports were already circulating, quiet questions in not-so-quiet rooms. How had a flagship destroyer failed during a routine training run? Why had the diagnostic AI caught nothing? Why did it take a retired mechanic with no clearance to bring it back? And more urgently, who was to blame? Captain Brannan had already received 2 encrypted messages marked U Urgent Review. They weren't thanks. They were demands. In a cramped lower-deck briefing room with buzzing lights and lukewarm coffee, a private meeting had gathered. Patel, Darby, Yuan, Raymond. Darby leaned back in his chair. We need to be aligned before this goes up the chain. Or 9, Raymond repeated without looking up. Darby shifted uncomfortably. There's already chatter protocol violations, undocumented repairs. If someone spins this wrong, we're the ones who'll pay for it. Ewan added. He's right. It worked, yes, but technically it could all be flagged. Raymond closed his notebook and set it on the table. You know what gets people hurt? Worrying more about paperwork than problems. Patel sighed. We're not debating if it worked, we're debating how to survive it. Raymond looked around. I didn't ask for this. I didn't need a Navy welcome. I came because the ship was drowning. If the suits don't like that, that's on them. Darby gave a respectful nod. Sir, I told you, Raymond cut in gently. Don't call me that. Patel leaned forward. If we report everything honestly, you'll never touch another Navy ship again. Raymond stood, not angry, just exhausted in a deeper way. I've fixed ships longer than most of you have been breathing Navy air. I've soldered in rolling storms, rerouted circuits while the damn floor tilted sideways. You think I ever needed permission? Silence. Footsteps approached. Captain Brannan entered with a tablet. They want me on a secure line in 10, she said. Some are calling it a system anomaly. Others want the whole thing buried. Raymond raised an eyebrow. Of course they do. They're asking how a civilian accessed the propulsion core? He gave a weary smile. Tell them I brought donuts. She almost smiled. Almost. He stepped closer. You want the truth in your report. Say this. The ship failed. Everyone failed. Then an old man walked on, listened, and fixed it. That's what happened. Don't lie to protect me. Don't lie to protect them. Brannan nodded. Transport's inbound. You'll be off the ship within the hour. Raymond looked toward the engine room one last time. The hum was strong now. Alive. She's breathing again. That's all I care about. As he neared the landing pad, someone called out behind him. Mr. Ellis, wait. Petty Officer D'Angelo Morris jogged up, slightly out of breath. You left this in the briefing room, he said, holding out the notebook. Raymond took it. Appreciate it. Morris hesitated. How did you know? Not just the capacitor, but how the whole system would react. That's not in any manual. Raymond looked him in the eye. Because you can't program instinct. Morris frowned, trying to understand. You've learned how things should work, Raymond said. Now learn what happens when they don't. Machines don't always fail like you expect. Sometimes they hide what's broken. Do you think I could learn that? Morris asked quietly. Raymond paused, then said gently, You just did. You watched, you listened. Next time something breaks, don't rush. Let the machine talk. Morris nodded slowly. Thank you, sir. Raymond patted his shoulder. Keep asking the hard questions, even when you're not supposed to. Minutes later, he stood beside the open door of the transport chopper. Captain Brannan approached. No salutes, just respect. I've been thinking about what you said, she said. Which part? The listening. I've been trusting numbers so long I forgot how to trust my own senses. Raymond nodded. It's easy to forget, especially when everything looks fine. But ships lie, just like people. She looked out over the open sea. What happens when people like you stop showing up? Raymond thought for a long moment. You hope someone else remembers, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not even next year, but someone finds your notes or asks the right question at the wrong time. Then he stepped aboard the chopper, no fanfare, no speeches. Just a man who showed up when a ship called out in silence and listened. Or they screw something up so badly, Raymond said softly, pulling the old wrench from his pocket. They have to do what I did. Go back to the beginning. He handed it to Captain Brannan without a word. She looked at it, hesitant. I can't take this. It's not for you, Raymond said. It's for the next sailor, someone who thinks they're too young to be right, and too old to still be learning. Keep it somewhere safe. Just don't forget where it came from. She accepted it like it was something sacred. The helicopter's blades began to spin. Raymond climbed in, then turned one last time. You've got a good ship, Captain. She's just not as shiny as she wants to be. Brannan smiled. Neither are most of us. The transport lifted, casting sea spray across the deck. Raymond didn't look back. He didn't need to. The ship was whole again. The story? Maybe it'd get buried. Or maybe it'd be whispered between crew members. Either way, Halcyon would sail on. That was enough. In his lap, the notebook stayed shut, but in his mind the pages were still turning. Because Raymond wasn't just fixing engines, he was leaving behind a map one made of mistakes, repairs, gut calls, and things that never made it into a manual. But back in Norfolk, something waited for something that told him his work wasn't done. Not yet. 2 days later, Raymond Ellis was back in his garage, same rusted tools, same sputtering desk fan. He was elbow deep in the guts of an old Eventrude engine, sleeves rolled, radio murmuring in the background. It felt like he'd never left. Until the call came. Not Pike, not the Navy, someone else. "Mr. Ellis, this is Commander Leanne Cho," the voice said. "I'm heading a training task force at the Naval Engineering School in Gulfport. Your name's been surfacing." Raymond wiped his hands and sat on the nearest stool. "I'm not recruiting," she added quickly. "I know you're retired. I heard what you did on the Halcyon. I was hoping you might be willing to talk. Not a lecture, just a conversation, about what doesn't make it into the manuals." Raymond didn't answer right away. "We've got smart kids," Cho continued, "but they're being trained by systems that assume they'll never have to go off script, that the ship will always tell the truth, but sometimes it lies. And I think you might be the only one left who remembers what that looks like." Raymond looked up at the stained ceiling tile, brown from an old leak that never got fixed. Years ago he'd thought it was ugly. Now it just looked honest. "I'll think about it," he said finally. Cho didn't push. "That's all I ask." After they hung up, Raymond stood in the doorway, watching the street. A city bus rolled past. A kid on a bike weaved between parked cars. Ordinary life. But in his mind, Halcyon still hummed. That afternoon, Raymond did something he hadn't done in years. He opened a brand new notebook. At the top of the first page he wrote, "Things the ship won't tell you." Beneath that he listed them, not technical specs, not procedures. Truths. The sound of a relay before it dies isn't sharp, it's sluggish. If a pump surges 3 times in 10 seconds, shut it down. The 4th surge means someone gets hurt. Don't trust a screen until you've touched the wire behind it. If the ship feels different, it probably is. By sundown, 5 pages were filled, not instructions, memory. The next morning, a package arrived, no return address. Inside was the photo Halcyon's engine room post-repair, mounted on the wall in a shadow box, the old wrench. Beneath it, a plaque read, "This tool once stopped a warship from going silent." Raymond smiled. Later that week, he agreed to speak with Cho's trainees. No podium, no slides, just folding chairs in a corner of a hangar, and that same old notebook. A young trainee asked, "What's the most important thing you ever fixed?" Raymond thought about the Halcyon, Bahrain, that makeshift bypass in '97, but instead he said, "My patience." The room stilled, not in confusion but understanding. "Someday," he told them, "you'll panic. You'll hear something you don't recognize, and the ship will stop listening, and everyone will look at you, not the manual, not the AI, you. If you panic too, you'll miss what it's saying." He tapped the notebook gently. "The good ones? They listen twice before they touch anything." The trainees nodded, absorbing every word like a lifeline. Afterward, one stayed behind, a young woman with grease-streaked coveralls. She asked, "Do you think machines remember us?" Raymond chuckled. "Maybe. But the better question is, will you remember them?" Then he handed her his notebook, not the new one, the original. The one with smudged pages and fingerprints from a lifetime of nights at sea. "Copy what you want," he said, "but only if you plan to add to it." That night in Norfolk, Raymond sat in his chair, radio low. The wrench was gone from its usual place. He didn't feel proud. He didn't feel like a hero. He just felt useful again. Because sometimes what we leave behind isn't tools or notes. It's the habit of listening when no one else does. Even the smallest act of kindness can echo across a lifetime. If this story moved you, share it and help us light the way for someone else. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us of what really matters.